How are you? Good to see you.
Good. It's a busy time of year, of course, and no matter how much you think you're ready, you're not. So,
Yeah, well, I just realized today that Christmas is just what 7 days away, right? Oh my god!
yeah,
See,
yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out where we can go and visit Santa Claus and get some photos with our little guy because this is his first Christmas. So I need to find Santa in the next 6 days, or else.
Yes, yes. You had best get
Mm,
focused on
yeah.
that. I'm still making Christmas cards, so I'm way behind as
Okay.
well.
And I think you mentioned that you're going away over the holiday period.
Yes, yeah. We depart on the 23rd, and not back until the new year. So that's looking very, very good at the moment. It's very cold, wet, and windy here, so getting
Mhm.
away from that would be
Yeah, well,
great.
it's the opposite here. In fact, I feel like the weather's just started to get hotter. It's always hot, but it's just started to get hotter. I didn't think like the hot return until
Oh.
January, but apparently it feels like it's getting a bit more sticky. So, yeah, we have two seasons here. We have
Oh.
summer and more summer.
Okay. Yes. Well, we don't have that problem here for
Yeah,
sure.
I've heard, but I'd still like to come and visit at some point.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely
cool.
worth
All
a
right. Well, how
visit.
about we get into it? Because last time we spoke, we talked mostly about the perils of splitting out your Wi Fi. But in that conversation, we learned that we both use Homey.
Yes.
And I would be interested to hear,
Yes.
your experience with Homey. I think you've mentioned that you've had a few problems recently. And just to frame this conversation a little bit for anybody who might be meeting us for the first time here, David is a smart home expert, many years of experience with a variety of different things. And I'm very much a novice. I'm coming at this with much more of a clean slate and I'm learning as I go. So, if it's okay, if I have your permission, David, perhaps as we go, if anything might not be immediately obvious to a beginner, someone coming into this topic for the very first time, I might ask some of those beginner questions. And look, it's going to be pretty easy for me to put that hat on because I'm not far removed from complete beginner myself.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well,
That's all
yeah, why don't
good.
you catch us up with how it's going with Homey, and we'll just take it from there.
Yeah. A little bit of background. I was using smart things for many years, and that's generally been okay. But stability and integration issues um, led me to think it's time to move on to something a little bit more stable and better. And for me, the two options were Home Assistant or Homey. And I really quite like the idea of a product that was supported by a manufacturer for commercial gain because you're more likely to have some leverage with them when things go wrong than a community based open source platform. And at that time, I think uh, it wasn't so much of an out of the box experience with Home Assistant. Having said all of that, I bought into Homey in a big way. I bought the Homey Hub, Homey Bridge, and Ethernet adapter, and got stuck in. And I have to say, it was a delight to start using Homey's flows for automations compared to the very simplistic automation rules that SmartThings has. They were much more powerful and easier to manage. You could create folders full of flows that were related to one another. And most significantly for me, one flow, which is the Homey term for automation rules, can actually handle multiple tasks in one definition, which makes it so much easier than having to mess around with a virtual device here and one rule to set this and another rule to set that. You want to be able to see them all in one place and get a big picture of it. So I've really enjoyed using the advanced flows and the graphical representation that Homey brings to it. Also, of course, it has a large number of radios for communicating with lots of different smart devices. When you've been doing this for as long as I have, you inevitably end up with a very large collection of disparate devices, and you really want them to be integrated in some way. So, having Zigbee, Z Wave, Bluetooth, Wi Fi, wired Ethernet, 433 megahertz RF, and infrared capability, which actually was quite important to me, all in one box. without having to buy extra was really significant. Of course, the downside is that, as we know, Homey Pro is not the cheapest smart home hub, and Home Assistant would probably be cheaper. But by the time you've added all those radios, the cost difference is not so great as you might at first think. And are you familiar with Somfy motors
No.
for curtains and blinds? They use a 433 megahertz RF protocol, which SmartThings and many others don't support, but Homey does. And so that saved me £100 by not having to buy a Somfy hub to talk to my Somfy motors. So you can kind of offset the cost. So things were going well. I was expanding it and adding lots of devices. And the way that you work with Homey is that there are so-called apps which you download, and then they provide the functionality for those devices with cards. This is a Homey term for properties that the device has. So turning on, turning off, those are cards that you can add in the graphical representation of flows. But it's hopefully all the things that the device supports. And some of those are really powerful. Yeah, it was going well. However, for some inexplicable reason, it crashed, and I lost all my work. And I restored it, and it crashed, and I lost all my work. Then it crashed and lost all my work again, and I was getting a little bit fed up with this, and so I've been toing and froing with Homey support, and sadly their support is very slow. It's via email, seldom less than a few days, and in some instances nearer 2 weeks. So it really does drag things out, and I realised that I wasn't really happy with doing this constant rebuilding of everything. Mind you, there is a plus to that, which you haven't maybe yet discovered, and that is when you do things a second time around, it's always better than the first time around, and you see new possibilities. So there is a plus to it. But anyway, Homey offer a subscription service to a cloud backup. So it's not very expensive, under €10 for the year, if I remember rightly. And once you're subscribed, every 24 hours, it takes a snapshot of its system and uploads it to their cloud. And so should you have the unfortunate situation that I did where it crashes, you'll be able to recommission everything and off you go again. Except that didn't work. All it did was crash and go again. So I got a bit fed up with that. You can do a local backup by means of the USB port. I never tried that because once I got something working, I was happy to leave it where it was. But it was right here on my desk, and that's not where it's supposed to live. So about a week ago, I moved it back to where it normally is supposed to live, next to the router. And the move, simply unplugging and plugging it in, caused it to crash and burn again. So this time, ATHM support suggested that it's probably defective. I think that was the word they used. And I bought it through a UK supplier. And cutting a long story short, I sent it back, and I'm currently waiting on them to send me a replacement.
Painful. How many? Can you give us an idea of how many flows you had to rebuild each time it crashed?
Oh, it got progressively smaller because I think I probably had, I don't know, upwards of 10 or 20 flows. But when I say a single flow, that doesn't sound very much until you realize that it was handling lots and lots of rules within one flow. I'll give you a for instance. It's an important one for me. If you have smart window treatments, particularly blinds and curtains in bedrooms, it's quite important that they open and close in a way that doesn't disturb your sleep. And so it took me a long time to create rules on SmartThings that meant that the blinds opened at a fixed time, 7 a.m. in my case, or sunrise, whichever is the later, and they close at sunset or 10:30, whichever is the earlier. And that sounds trivial, but it's actually quite difficult to do in SmartThings. It turns out to be really quite easy to do in Homey. And once you've got that basic structure, I was able to make one flow deal with all the different blind manufacturers and curtain manufacturers that I've got, and process it all in a way that made it very easy to manage. So I was really pleased with that. But that threw up some interesting anomalies because clearly things like sunrise and sunset are astronomical time, and that's computed every day based on your geographical location in the world. And it turns out that Homey was calculating those things slightly different from smart things and from Alexa as well. And it was quite a few minutes out. And I queried that with Atham, and they said, oh, yes, the location is not very accurate. And that accounts for the time difference. Well, I'm thinking, well, that's really surprising. And it was a couple of minutes different, couple of minutes. And they said, oh, yeah, but there is a solution. There's a community written app that provides much finer granularity on the time zone and a whole bunch of other stuff as well, like the angle of the sun at any given part of the day and twilight and a bunch of other stuff. So I tried that, and that was much better. Still not quite the same, but it was much better. And that's one of the great things about Homey, the development of community-driven apps to expand it beyond what Homey themselves can do means that it's ever expanding and new things can be added. So it's not a closed system by any means, and people are really quite productive with some of the things that they've produced.
Well, I haven't actually played around with any of the community-driven, community-developed apps yet myself. I'm just scratching the surface
Oh,
of
okay.
what Homey is capable of. Fortunately for me, I haven't experienced crashing as you've described, but I'm also kind of lucky in the sense that I'm kind of just in the beginning stages of building out my smart home and adding some products and devices, and I probably only have a total of maybe 10 flows at the moment, and most of them are very, very basic, like, hey, monitor the battery level of this device and let me know if I need to replace the batteries, right? So it wouldn't be a huge problem. It wouldn't take me a lot of time to rebuild my flows, although it would still bother me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think my experience shows that backups are important, but they're only valuable if they work. So, um, and I've been suspicious that it was a hardware issue for some little while in my case. I was having some other problems early on in attaching Z-Wave devices. It was a bit particular about it, and I was suspicious that was causing hardware crashing, but I can't prove that. But there was definitely a lot of flakiness going on with mine,
Well,
which
this
was
might be a
very
nugget of
disappointing.
wisdom, actually. Having gone through this experience up until this point that you're at the moment, and you've just mentioned that you think backups are important, sounds like they are. Where you're at the moment, what would you suggest is the best solution for backups?
Ah, okay. I actually think that Atham's own cloud backup service, it's very low cost, and if it actually does work automatically every 24 hours, and you can recover from it, that is as close to perfection as you're likely to get. Manually backing up is tedious because you have to uh, physically bring the hub to a computer and use a USB connection, and then you run their cloud software, which creates the backup locally. Um, I'm not going to do that every 24 hours. That's just not going to happen. So, no, for me, the automatic backup, should it work, and I've yet to see that work, it seems the sensible way to do it. It's something that SmartThings doesn't have. And fortunately, I've never lost everything, but I certainly see stories of people that do lose everything from time to time. So yeah, definitely worth the
But you
modest
had
cost, I think.
the Homey, the Atom cloud-based backups. You had this great solution, and it didn't
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. Well, the first few crashes I didn't because I couldn't see the value in it. But after it happened too many times, I thought, great, I know how to solve this now. I shall just subscribe to the backup, and then when and if it ever happens again, I'm sorted. But it was such a shock to realize that when I did a restore, all it did was restore and then immediately crash. It just never actually worked. And I, I don't know whether you've ever had to reset the Homey Pro, but it involves pressing a recessed switch through a pinhole. and holding it for 30 seconds and then releasing. And I've done that more times than I care to recall, and I get a bit fed up with pressing pins in the back of the thing all the time. So yeah, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that a new unit's on its way to me and it's going to solve things. But of course, I have the problem now that some of my blinds were being controlled by Homey. I'm about to go away, as we discussed, and I'm now at a difficult point where I haven't got enough time to reconstruct all the Homey stuff. So I'm actually going to have to temporarily move some of my devices back onto the SmartThings platform. So I've got some continuity for simulated occupancy, or as some of the Americans I know refer to it, moccupancy. I don't know whether you've come across that term,
Well, I
but
like that one. I remember
yeah.
you mentioned that in our previous conversation as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think that it's all very well having lights coming on and off, but having curtains open and close is probably a surer indication of occupancy than the lights. So yeah, that's quite important, I
Okay,
think.
and are you confident that this new Homey unit? Well, are you hopeful? I mean, of course you're hopeful, but what's your gut telling you? Is this going to solve your problem?
Gosh, I do hope so, because I've made a significant investment of time and effort in all of this. Um, Watching the forums and the community stuff, I get the impression that it's not a common experience. So I think it's probably a one-off. I do hope so. But should those problems persist, um, I may have to reappraise the situation and may have to go back to the idea of doing Home Assistant and and learn all that there is to learn about that, which is a shame, but maybe that's where I need to go. Of course, since we last spoke about Homey, there's been quite a few developments from Atham. I don't know whether you've been keeping up
But
with that,
perhaps we can talk
but
about them now. There's been a couple of big announcements just in the last week.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, perhaps the most significant one is the LG acquisition of the company. They haven't bought it all yet. I think they've only got an 80% share, but we know where that's going. And as you probably know, SmartThings was a Kickstarter startup that was eventually bought by Samsung. And I don't think Samsung have really managed it as well as they might have done. And my fear is that LG will follow the same pattern. I hope not, but we shall see on that one. But then there's been some significant product announcements from Atham as well. The dashboard, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I haven't experimented with that just yet. We'll circle back to that in a minute. But only yesterday, of course, they launched the Homey Pro Mini, which
Well,
is
what's
very
your take on that?
interesting.
Because I was reading a little bit about it, and it seems like some people love it, some people hate it.
Yeah, well, I think what people who hate it say is that they want the Homey Pro as it is, but at that lower price point. They don't understand that you can't have everything for less. And uh, it's all broadly irrelevant, of course, because it's only being launched in the US and Canada early next year. So it's not going to come to the UK and the rest of the world for some while after that. But I think that their plan, which is to encourage development of the product in the US, is clearly a good one. They need to do that. And they've clearly cherry picked what communication standards they want to support, and the conspicuously missing ones are Z-Wave, and uh, but they've got all the ones that are probably important for the future.
Yeah, I was just looking at the announcement before we jumped on the call here, and that 433 is missing as well, right?
And infrared
Yeah.
and Bluetooth. Sorry, no, not Bluetooth. Yeah,
Um, yeah. Okay. Well, interesting.
Wi-Fi.
And yeah. Okay. So I'm just reading it here in front of me now. So extend. Homey Pro Mini with Homey Bridge to effortlessly connect your Z-Wave, Bluetooth, 433, and infrared devices. So it's got everything else standard out of the box. And it says you can buy a Homey Bridge separately for $69. And of course, these prices don't account for state sales tax, which will be different in each of the different states in the US.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also an indication that when it arrives in Europe, it's going to be VAT, sales tax added on all of those prices plus conversion costs. So the chances of a $199 product being £199 or €199 is very slim. It's going to be probably 20% more than that. But we shall see.
Yeah, and there was one other announcement as well. I think it was about a week ago. They announced the new energy. Did you see this?
Yes, yes, I had a look at that, but I'm not sure if they're using their own dongle to attach to a smart meter or whether they've sourced a third party one. But it turns out that the smart meters in the UK, surprise, don't support that communication standard, so it's not coming here anytime soon.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, when I first saw this, I thought it's probably not going to be particularly relevant to me, although it does look interesting. And I would love to, just the dashboards themselves, like the reports associated with this new energy feature set. It looks really, really nice. But I just thought it's probably not going to be particularly relevant to me
Mm,
here in Malaysia where I live because, firstly, we don't have solar panels on the outside of our home. And obviously, that's a big part of power management for people that have that. And we don't need to worry about thermostats for heating during the colder months because there are no colder months. So I think it'd be probably less relevant, less applicable for me here, but it still looks interesting.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think it's the way that all of these products are going. And um, the new investors, LG and like Samsung before them with smart things, guess what? They make lots of air conditioning and other energy consuming products. So to bring that all together makes perfect sense for these guys. Um, yeah, that's really just a toe in the water. I'm sure that's going to get more significant. But I was dismayed to discover that the UK rollout of smart meters has been so messed up, and the lack of the necessary data port that's compatible is a serious omission, I think.
Okay, well, that might help to explain a little bit of what they say, they being Homey, say about the availability. And I'm just reading again here. Customers in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Lithuania, Austria, Switzerland, and Hungary can pre order the Homey Energy dongle, and first shipment is expected in March 2025. Notably absent from that list is the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and that's the reason. Without getting into too much detail, the energy companies have been dragging their heels, and there's a Type 1 and a Type 2 smart meter. The Smart 1 is technically obsolete, and the Type 2, still doesn't have the data port that's needed that all these other countries have adopted. So it's uh, yeah, it's very distressing. Yeah. I do have a smart meter, and I think the most energy it saves me is if I unplug it. So it's not something I'm glued to. But I have friends who have solar panels and battery storage, and they get absolutely obsessed with when the sun's shining and how much power they're generating, and it all gets a bit tedious. I would love to do all of that myself, but I don't want that fine detail to rule my life. I just want it to get on with it and do it
Yeah,
well.
I think I would be one of those people if I had solar panels and if I had a smart meter. I think I would be glued to the analytics and the dashboard as well. Yeah, I
Oh,
think so.
really?
It
Okay.
just fascinates me, but it is a bit of a novelty. And like you said, perhaps the best cost savings are just turning the thing off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because I'm an electronic engineer by profession, I understand what kind of appliances consume more power. I don't need a box of tricks to tell me that the oven and the washing machine and the tumble dryer are the big consumers. But some people don't understand. There was a TV program only yesterday, and they were giving tips for saving energy. And one of them was put a timer on your Christmas tree lights. And I'm thinking, really? If you've got to go out and buy a timer, you've probably spent more money than whatever energy you're likely to save. Because it's so tiny, LED lights are negligible in the scheme of things. So there's a lot of uh, I don't know, ignorance, I guess, and lack of understanding.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with regard to your own experiences with Homey, or kind of wait and see mode at the moment before we move on?
Yeah, I'm kind of in wait and see mode. Yeah, I'm really hopeful that a new one solves the problems and we can move forward, because I really do like the programming method. It is quite delightful compared to a lot of other systems that I've used over the years, and I think the guys behind it all are to be applauded for having got as far as they have with it. Really, so I'm keen to
Yeah,
support them.
yeah. Well, actually, perhaps before we change topics, I can just share a couple of things about my own Homey situation here in my place. But I agree with you. I think it's a pleasure to use. I haven't yet experienced or played around with any of the advanced flows on the web app. I've only set up the flows using the mobile application, and it's very easy. And so far, it's been able to do everything that I've needed it to do. I haven't encountered anything where I've actually felt like, oh, I can't do what I need to do in the mobile app. Maybe I can do it in the advanced flows. But overall, I'm really really enjoying the system, and I perhaps
Mm.
well, perhaps one of my favorite things. I've got two favorite flows at the moment. One of them's related to lighting, and I know you're a big fan of automated lighting. So in our lobby area outside our front door, we've got three Zigbee Akara lights, and we've got a P1 motion sensor out there, and it's just like magic. We love it. Everybody loves it. Everybody that comes in here is like, "Whoa, fancy!" And if you don't know what's going on, it's magic, right? That is really really enjoyable.
Yeah.
And the other one that I like is at our dining room table. We've got a vibration sensor there, and again another Akara Zigbee light there, and you just sort of bash the table gently, and the light comes on. But one thing that I cannot figure out why this is happening is at the dining table. So the flow is something like if vibration is detected, turn the light on, leave it on for 20 minutes, and then turn the light off. And obviously, sometimes we're sitting there eating dinner, the light will go off, and I'll say, oh, no problem. I'll just tap the table again, and the light comes straight back on. No big deal, right? I'm able to restart, re trigger that flow immediately. Well, it would be better if the light didn't turn off in the first place, but that's a whole nother conversation. Outside in the lobby area, I
Yep.
don't
Mm.
seem to be able to re-trigger the lights to come on after they've gone off. So that those flows outside are something along the lines of if motion is detected, turn the lights on, leave them on for 5 minutes, and then turn them off. But out there, the lights go off. I re-trigger motion, and the lights don't come back on, and I don't know why. Why is that happening? Maybe you don't know either, but I find it really, really annoying.
No, yeah, I hear what you're saying. No, I don't know the answer to that, but it's almost certainly some kind of property associated with the app that drives those particular devices. At least that's what I assume it is. I don't think it's inherent in the main operating system that it has so limitations. Because if that were the case, your table one wouldn't work either. But
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
check it out. I did notice just
interesting.
in preparation for this call, I just noticed in the last 24 hours somebody left a comment on a YouTube video that I published about that, and they had a suggestion, so I might circle back to that. By the way, we got some positive feedback about our last conversation, David. People seem to enjoy it. We got some nice comments and some emails, and so pleasure to have you back on.
Oh, great! Thanks. It's good to know that people have found
Yeah,
it
I think there were
useful.
some real pearls of wisdom in there, and in this conversation as well. And how are we going for time? We're about half an hour in. Look, I might like to really quickly talk about the fact that you've just touched on uh, an interest in home assistance, and I feel the same way. Although you're much
Mm.
more technically capable than I am. Okay, so perhaps I'll share, why I got started with Homey and I was doing my research about, hey, which ecosystem should I consider? Home Assistant was something that was just repeatedly recommended, and it sounds fantastic. And then I did a bit of digging, and I just thought, this is not for me. This is a bit too complicated for me. I think I need something that's a bit more suitable for a beginner, for a novice. And that's how I came to Homey. And I haven't regretted that decision yet. Although I will admit, I'm Home Assistant curious, I think you might say at the moment. And it sounds like it's getting more and more accessible for a beginner.
Yeah, a friend of mine who I worked with many years ago, and I both discussed this at the start of the year, and they went with Home Assistant, and he was telling me how it's almost plug and play now, and he was pleasantly surprised at how many devices it discovered automatically, and was really singing its praises. And it's quite clear that it's moved on a lot from having to write complicated code and creating a lot of stuff yourself. And I'm not interested in that. I made a career out of doing that, and I don't really want to do it now. I want something that works with minimal intervention all the time. I think Home Assistant is clearly very powerful and getting more powerful all the time, and it will suit a lot more people now than it did back in the day. But it still requires a lot of technical understanding and just to basically get a box that works and with all the necessary radios. It's not trivial. It's not plug and play. And there's some aspects of it which are, but it's a long way from all of that. If you enjoy tinkering and you've got the time to spare, then it's a rabbit hole that is probably worth going down. But no, I think that for me at the moment, it's probably not the better
Well,
choice.
I'm in a similar situation to you in terms of, we're both kind of just doing this as a hobby because we enjoy it. This was your career for a long time. For me, it's kind of a
Mhm.
side hobby thing that I enjoy. So, look, I don't have a lot of time to be tinkering all day, every day. And in fact, I'm already struggling to find the time to add devices that have been sitting on my desk to Homey as it is. But
Mhm.
I am really, really interested and I'm paying attention. And I feel like at some point I will pull the trigger and it sounds like the Home Assistant Green is almost just plug and play
Mhm.
out of the box. So that has my attention. And I don't know if
Almost.
I want to be
Yeah.
running Homey in parallel with Home Assistant. I mean, what's the point in that? But I'm paying attention, and I think if I ever were to switch or to add, another system just for fun, it would probably be. Excuse me, let me just decline that call. Sorry, I should have probably turned that off before we started talking. It would probably be Home Assistant, I think.
Yeah, I'm concerned about Home Assistant because it is um, open source and it is community developed and all the rest of it. There's a lot of people involved in it, so it is possible that it could all come to a grinding halt at some point. Um, and there's no um, commercial support for it as such. And then there are pros and cons for both of those things. But it's still a long way from being from everybody. And I was concerned that if LG were out there shopping for a platform and they ended up buying Homey, maybe somebody would go out there and want to buy Home Assistant. But apparently, the community tells me that that can't happen. It's sort of all open source, so that is a degree of protection. But I think you have to be, by definition, a bit of a tinkerer, even with the green solution. There's just too many variables involved with making the box work. But it's certainly getting there. And interestingly, I don't know whether you've discovered this in your part of the world, but in the UK, there are custom installers who have based their entire business model on using Home Assistant. And I would have to question the wisdom of that, but there are people doing it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting. And I'm not actually sure if any, but I haven't heard of anybody here using Home Assistant. However, I will mention that I got bad information about it, other smart home devices and smart home ecosystems. So, I'm sure people probably are, especially if it's an open source project that anybody is free to use. I feel like I'm going to do it eventually. Probably not anytime soon. I feel like right now I'm only just scratching the surface with Homey. I've got a lot more to learn, and I'm going to keep paying attention. A couple of things that I find interesting about Home Assistant are I think I heard or saw something recently that they're going to be rolling out their own voice assistant, like their own competitor of the
Mm.
Amazon voice assistant for their own ecosystem. And that sounds like it could be very powerful. But something else that is probably something that's holding me back from taking the leap is it sounds like there are a lot of updates. Like every month, you've got to update everything, and then that just sounds like a mess.
Yeah, and if I've learned anything about updates, they fix some things and break others, and yeah, uh, that's why I prefer the idea of a commercial proposition, because they've got a vested interest in keeping it going, whereas the community thinks, oh, that's an interesting problem, I'll get straight on it, and maybe a solution that works for them comes along and it's not applicable to everybody else. I don't know. It's evolving
Yeah.
clearly. Yeah. But one of the things about the voice assistant that you mentioned, I don't know anything about the Homey Assistant plans, but it sounds to me that it'll be a first generation product comparable to how Alexa and maybe others are at the moment. But with Alexa AI on the horizon, it seems probable that it will be behind the capabilities that you can achieve by using um, an AI powered voice assistant.
I'm not
But
sure.
who
I
knows?
can't remember the details, and I'm certainly not qualified to say one way or another. But I would be really surprised if Home Assistant brought out their own voice assistant and rolling into 2025, and it didn't have the option to bring your own OpenAI API keys or some sort of
Mm,
AI integration. That would surprise me. Not to say that's not
yeah.
what's going to happen. I don't know.
No, I'm sure you're right. Somebody far cleverer than me will have already figured out how they can do that, even if it's not officially supported. But to what end? You know, at the end of the day, um, uh, uh, it's either a hobby for your own sake or it's a resource for everybody that lives in your house to just live with and use. And you've no doubt heard the expression "wife acceptance factor." You know, that is clearly very important, and I suspect changing things weekly or monthly is not going to improve that factor a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Perhaps an interesting, fun way to end here, David. We've heard a lot of conversation about the importance of running things locally for security and for privacy. I've heard many conversations about the pros and cons of having cameras inside your home and which brands of cameras you would trust the most and the least. Okay, but what I want to ask you to end here is how comfortable would you be, and where might you draw the line on using AI and integrating AI into your smart home? How do you feel about that?
For me, I think that the appeal of using AI that enables me to tell the system what I want it to do, and it goes away and writes its own routines or flows or whatever comes next, is the most appealing aspect of it. I'm not really looking for something to have a conversation with, although that might be interesting on occasions. Again, it's not something you're going to do on a day to day basis, minute by minute, So uh, yes, oh dear, automatic automation I think is where I'm trying to put that, so that you just say, I want a routine that opens my blinds at 7 or sunrise, whichever's the later, and it goes away and does it. That
Hmm.
would be really powerful, because it then opens the door to really quite advanced operations to people that have got no concept of programming or structure or rules or anything like that. So that's where I hope it's going, and I don't see any privacy issues with that as such. But cameras, yeah, I like everybody. I have a collection of cameras outside and inside, and the inside ones are never armed unless I'm away. So I think that tells you what I need to say about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I've only at the moment we've only got one camera inside, and that's to monitor the baby while he's sleeping. But from time to time, I look at
Yeah.
that and I wonder, like, I wonder about this thing. Is it really secure? And I don't really care about that one, to be honest. I mean, what are they going to see? They're going to see a sleeping baby. Oh, speaking of which, sounds like he's waking up. So that might be a good time to wrap it up, David. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for coming
Okay.
back on. It's been a
Time to
real
go.
pleasure.
Yeah. It's been my pleasure too. So good
Oh,
luck with finding Santa
thank you. Yeah,
for
the
baby.
clock's ticking. We've got 6 days. All
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Well,
Thank you,
we'll
David.
speak to you again soon.